Hey guys, tonight we are slipping into a world where scissors glint under candlelight, the floor squishes faintly underfoot, and your neighborhood haircut might just come with a side of minor surgery. You trudge through a muddy alley into a space that smells like hot metal, old soap, and something unmistakably like boiled leeches. Welcome to your local medieval barbershop, where the concept of full service really gets put to the test. Oh, and spoiler alert, you probably will not survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You duck through a low doorway into the cramped, humid interior of a barbershop in, let us say, 1350. A small bell tinkles as you enter, but the only person who notices is a boy sweeping the floor with a straw broom. The air hangs thick with the sharp tang of iron and something that smells eerily like meat gone wrong. Along one wall, an elderly man groans softly in a wooden chair, clutching a bandaged jaw. In the corner, a barrel marked "Used rags" threatens to overflow. The barber, your host tonight, greets you with a grin that suggests he is either very confident or very underqualified, possibly both. You try not to stare at the lineup of jars behind him. They contain an alarming variety of items: curling scissors, bone saws, dirty rags, forceps, what might be a trepanation drill, and leeches. So many leeches, bloated and glistening in brackish water. It is not even clear if you are here for a trim or to have something violently extracted from your body. And here's the twist: neither is he. You learn quickly that in this era, a barber is not just someone who cuts hair. He is your community's all-purpose bodily maintenance man. Got a toothache? He is your guy. Coughing up blood? He can handle that. Need your tonsils scraped out or a boil lanced? He has got the tools somewhere under that stained rag. This was not just accepted, it was expected. Barbers were often the only accessible health workers for most people in medieval Europe, especially the poor. Physicians, assuming they existed in your area at all, were expensive, rare, and far too busy arguing about Aristotle to deal with your infected toenail. The barber, however, would see you right away. After all, he had the tools and the free time between beard trims. At the heart of his practice, the leech, that jar of slippery freeloaders, was not just for show. Bloodletting was considered a routine treatment for just about every ailment. Feeling sluggish? Too much black bile. Trouble sleeping? Excess phlegm. Achy knees? You guessed it, imbalance of the four humors. The barber would apply a few strategically placed leeches and send you on your merry way, a little lighter, a little dizzier, and theoretically a lot healthier. But do not worry, it was not all blood and gore. There was also lice. The standard haircut of the time came with a generous amount of head inspection. Lice combs were as common as scissors, and every customer was assumed to have something crawling around their scalp. In fact, the barber might even sell you a little herbal salve to rub behind your ears. something between flea repellent and medieval conditioner. Whether it worked is dubious, but it probably smelled better than the room you're standing in. Quirky fact incoming. In some regions, barbers kept live leeches not just in jars, but inside their own mouths. Yes, mouth storage. For warmth and mobility, apparently. So next time your modern stylist offers you a mint, be grateful that is all they are carrying around orally. Now, you might be wondering how someone becomes a barber in this era. Is there training? Certification? A licensing board? Not even close. Most barbers learned by apprenticing under someone who had not accidentally killed too many patients. You would sweep floors, clean tools, and if lucky, maybe get to shave someone's chin after 6 months. If you showed promise and survived the occasional infected nick or a nasty bite from a patient, you would eventually graduate to minor surgeries, tooth pulling, wound cleaning, even cauterization. If you could do it without fainting, congratulations, you were a barber surgeon. Historians still argue whether the average barber actually made people better or just thinned out the population creatively. Some insist they provided essential care when no one else would. Others think they just did enough to keep patients semi-functional until nature ran its course, or until the local monastery took them in for more spiritual solutions. It is hard to say how many people walked out of these shops feeling better, but one thing is certain. Everybody walked out a little changed, and often missing something. You duck instinctively as the barber tosses a bloodied cloth into the corner barrel and calls out cheerfully for his next customer. He is humming something, possibly a prayer, possibly a song about sausages. Either way, it is your turn in the chair. You sit. The wood is sticky. The headrest is damp. He reaches for a blade with a chipped edge and asks, "So, haircut or healing? Welcome to the chair. You are not going anywhere for a while." You stare at the array of instruments laid out before you, and it hits you. None of these should logically be used on both hair and arteries. Yet here they are: scissors, razors, curved knives, and bone-handled tools with vague, menacing purposes. You spot something that looks like a cheese grater next to a delicate set of tweezers. This is not a salon. This is a place where scissors and scalpels share drawer space and get used with alarming frequency, sometimes within the same 10 minutes. Your barber is proud of his kit. He wipes his hands on his apron. Why even bother? And lifts a slender blade into the candlelight, showing off its uneven edge like a badge of honor. You nod politely while your inner voice suggests that maybe you were fine with your toothache after all. This merging of beautician and butcher is not some regional oddity. It was standard practice throughout Europe for centuries. The same man who trimmed your bangs could also remove a cyst or cauterize a wound. If it involved flesh and a sharp object, it fell within his jurisdiction. Hair, skin, blood, bone. It was all part of the same job description. The rationale was partly economic and partly logistical. Villages could rarely afford both a doctor and a barber, so the solution was to roll them into one grimly resourceful package. Barbers were cheaper, more available, and this might surprise you. They often had steadier hands. Physicians spent a lot of time theorizing, barbers got practice. A common tool of the trade, the fleam. It looks like a folding pocket knife mated with a vampire's toolkit. Used primarily for bloodletting, it featured multiple blades for opening veins at different angles. Then there is the searing iron, a rod heated in the fire until glowing red, applied directly to open wounds to stop bleeding or to sterilize. Kind of. Depending on how strong your constitution is, you might also appreciate the inclusion of a cautery clamp, which compresses flesh and sears it simultaneously. Efficient, painful, and very smoky. Do not even get started on the tonsil spoon. As odd as it sounds, these procedures were not as reckless as they may seem through modern eyes. Medieval barbers followed their own internal logic based on the prevailing medical theories of the day. The theory of humors, the idea that the body was governed by 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, dictated that any imbalance could cause disease. So naturally, draining a bit of blood or occasionally applying a hot poker seemed perfectly reasonable. If you were melancholy, you needed less black bile. If you were too energetic, clearly you were plagued by excess yellow bile. Why not let some out? The tools matched the theory. Different knives and cups for different regions of the body, depending on which humor needed balancing. Yes, barbers had regional bleed charts, like twisted road maps of wellness. Elbow vein for liver issues, ankle vein for bad digestion, behind the ear if your dreams were too weird lately. It is not entirely clear if anyone got better, but the methodology had structure. Sort of. Quirky aside, barbers often carried specialized packs with hidden compartments. Some folded out like a picnic set from hell. You would open one flap to reveal combs and scissors, another to find forceps and lancets, and a final layer for herbs, powders, and sometimes a nice hunk of dried pig fat. That last bit was for lubrication, protection, or possibly flavor, depending on what procedure was underway. The overlap between grooming and surgery occasionally led to confusion. One famous anecdote tells of a nobleman who entered a barber shop for a shave and ended up getting an ingrown toenail removed against his will. He left limping but smooth-cheeked. It is unclear which part he paid for. Historians still argue whether this jack-of-all-trades role helped or hurt the overall health of the population. On one hand, it meant medical access was relatively widespread. On the other, it meant complex procedures were done by people who had never even read a book on anatomy. The survival rate depended on a barber's experience, hand stability, and, honestly, whether he was sober. You glance over at a teenage apprentice hunched over a wooden bucket, carefully boiling forceps in what looks like old ale. Sanitization, in this time, is more of a concept than a standard. A heated blade is considered clean. So is anything dunked in wine or spirits. Soap? Sometimes. Boiling water? Only if someone remembered to fetch it. There is a strange dignity to it, though. A kind of rough honesty. The tools are all visible. The procedure is out in the open, and the barber does not pretend to be anything other than what he is. The one person willing to touch your swollen abscess or pull that molar loose before it rots your jaw. As you settle more deeply into the sticky chair, you realize something else. This was also a space for community. People gathered here to talk, complain, eavesdrop, and trade rumors. It was not just a place of grooming and gruesome care, it was social glue. Men discussed politics while being shaved. Wounds were compared like battle trophies. Some barbershops even doubled as informal post offices, distributing messages from travelers or merchants. And amidst all that, you cannot help noticing that your barber never quite stops moving. Even while listening to gossip or offering leeches to a newly arrived widow, he is washing tools, sharpening blades, rewrapping cloth. There is a rhythm to it, not sterile, but efficient, maybe even soothing if you ignore the screams from the back room. You hear someone mention a name, a local legend in the barbering world, a man said to be able to cut hair with one hand while removing a boil with the other. You are not sure if that is skill or a sign of madness, but either way, it earns him respect. So, as the candlelight flickers and the barber reaches once again into that cursed drawer, you brace yourself, because whether it is a beard trim, a bloodletting, or something far worse, this man is ready. And the same blade might be used for all three. The barber sets down the blade and selects a pair of iron forceps that resemble the unfortunate love child of a bird's beak and a wrench. You hope this is for your haircut. It is not. A groan from the back signals the next procedure. Tooth extraction. You crane your neck slightly. Discreet curiosity wins over good judgment, and glimpse a gaunt figure slumped in a second chair, clutching a swollen cheek. His eyes are wild, mouth ajar, a thread of drool hanging in midair like a question mark. A bystander murmurs something about bad humors in the gum, which, frankly, sounds like the title of a terrible folk song. Your barber cracks his knuckles. Here's the thing. In the Middle Ages, dental care was a horror show wrapped in good intentions. There were no dentists as we know them today. If you had a toothache, your options were suffer, pray, or ask your local barber to get a grip, literally. Tooth pulling was one of the barber's signature services. There were no x-rays, no anesthetics, and absolutely no Novocaine. If your tooth was decayed or impacted, it had to come out. End of story. The barber would tilt your head back, insert the iron forceps, and yank. The procedure was over in seconds, hopefully. If not, you got seconds. And thirds. The tool of choice? The pelican. No, not the bird. Though the shape was oddly similar, this iron contraption looked like a hinged claw and worked by hooking the offending tooth and levering it out, ideally in one go. Unless, of course, it shattered. Then the barber would dig for the roots using something resembling a metal crochet hook. Comforting. Modern, you might flinch. But back then, this was just part of life. Teeth decayed quickly thanks to grain-heavy diets and poor hygiene. Sugar was rare, but when it showed up in Europe through trade, it did not help anyone smile. People chewed on herbs, rinsed with wine, or rubbed ashes and salt on their gums in a desperate attempt to stay ahead of decay. Spoiler, they rarely did. Quirky sidebar. Some barbers advertised their tooth-pulling services by displaying extracted teeth in the window, a literal collection of trophies. Some even strung them on necklaces. Imagine that. A man leaning over you with your neighbor's molar bouncing against his apron. Motivating, if nothing else. And as you watch the extraction begin, you realize the audience is part of the experience. This is not a private moment. It is theater. People gather to watch. There is gossip, cheering, and sometimes wagering. The poor soul in the chair is both patient and performer. And when the tooth finally comes free with a squelchy pop, the room erupts in applause. The barber holds it aloft like a knight brandishing a severed dragon's head. The victim slumps sideways, eyes fluttering, while a helper presses a wad of cloth soaked in vinegar into his mouth. Helps prevent evil vapors, the apprentice whispers, though it mostly just makes the guy gag. Historians still argue whether barbers knew when to stop. Tooth infections could kill, traveling down to the jaw, and triggering abscesses or worse. Some barbers, seeing swelling, would opt for more aggressive lancing or, if you can believe it, cauterization. Others attempted tooth powders and herbal poultices. One 14th century recipe mixed crushed mint, pepper, and the ash of burnt goat hooves. Unsurprisingly, success was hit or miss. You glance at the tools again. No one is washing anything. The forceps go right back on the table, beside the razors and leech jars. The barber wipes his hands on his apron and returns to you with the same affable grin, as though he did not just wrench a molar from a man's head in front of a live audience. You exhale and tell yourself you just came for a trim. But now your barber is talking about pterygoid tension and whether your shoulders are out of alignment. He presses 2 fingers into your neck and mutters, "Ah yes, bad blood. This is not a diagnosis. This is a sentence." Because now, of course, it is time for a bit of bloodletting. The ritual of bloodletting is not a surprise anymore. It was the most common medical treatment for nearly every ailment under the sun. Fevers, colds, headaches, anxiety, gout, indigestion, even broken hearts, if you talked to the right barber. There were many methods: leeches, slicing, or the use of cupping vessels with tiny blades hidden underneath. The preferred vein depended on your complaint. You are lucky tonight. Your barber goes for the arm. At least it is not the neck. He wraps a leather band tight around your bicep, tilting your arm just so. Then out comes the lancet, a triangular blade used to pierce the skin quickly and cleanly. Clean is a relative term here. And there it is. A sharp sting, a warm trickle, and a small pewter bowl to catch the results. No gloves, no band-aids, just a cloth, a little ash, and good old-fashioned optimism. It was not all mindless bleeding, though. The barber had guidelines. Some even carried almanacs that detailed the best days for letting blood based on lunar phases and the zodiac. Do not bleed on a Tuesday under Mars, one might warn, or you will faint and forget your own name. Was that medical advice or superstition? In the 1300s, there was not much of a line between the two. Quirky tidbit. Some barbers offered bloodletting subscriptions. Pay a set fee per season and receive regular vein trainings, just like a medieval gym membership. Keeps the humors in balance and your wallet predictably light. Your barber dabs the wound with a rag that might once have been white, then slathers on something green and gritty. He calls it wound butter. You try not to ask what is in it. Spoiler, lard, herbs, and sometimes powdered frog bones. No one knows if it worked, but hey, at least it smelled like basil. As the bleeding stops and the bowl is passed off to be emptied into what? You are not sure. You begin to feel lightheaded, whether from the blood loss, the smell, or the knowledge that this was once the best healthcare available. It is hard to say, but you are not done yet. The barber leans in and whispers, "Do you want your nails done as well?" Of course you do, because here, once you are in the chair, the services just keep on coming. You stretch your fingers, hoping the next ordeal involves nothing sharper than a file. But your barber grins and pulls out a slender, curved blade with a flourish that suggests nail care in the Middle Ages might be. Dramatic. He gently takes your hand, somehow both kind and threatening, and begins inspecting your fingernails with the same seriousness a blacksmith might give a sword. Apparently, your cuticles have committed crimes against balance and dignity. He tuts, mutters something about nail humors, and begins to trim. Medieval nail care was not just cosmetic. Long, ragged nails were considered a sign of laziness, filth, or demonic possession, depending on who you asked. A well-groomed hand meant order and hygiene, at least by the standards of the day. And for the working class, clean nails could help prevent the buildup of grime and infection. Though let us be honest, the average peasant probably did not sit down for a full mani-pedi. Still, in towns and cities, barbers offered nail trimming, callus removal, and sometimes, if you were feeling fancy, a bit of herbal salve rubbed into the palms. You would smell like rosemary and hope. Your barber files with what looks like a rusted rasp. It probably doubled as a woodworking tool. Sparks fly from your thumb. You are told this is normal. The room around you continues to buzz with activity. A woman arrives with a bandaged wrist and leaves with a poultice that smells suspiciously like old onions. A boy gets his head shaved to combat lice. A knight wanders in, demanding leeches for his melancholia. The barber nods knowingly, like this is the third night this week to complain about too many feelings. It is easy to forget, in the snips and scratches, that the barber shop is more than a service station. It is a survival hub. It is where medical knowledge, local gossip, and experimental remedies all swirl together like some chaotic herbal tea. Your barber tells you that nail shape reveals personality. Round nail, gentle heart. Square nail, cautious mind. Dirty nail, you probably angered the stars. You ask whether astrology plays a part in trimming technique. He answers by changing the subject and offering you a dried clove to chew on. For breath, he says, though it tastes like regret and old wood. Quirky detail. Some barbers kept small cages of songbirds in the corner to soothe clients during procedures. It did not work, but at least there was cheerful chirping while someone bled into a basin. And as your barber finishes your nails, He reaches for a small jar filled with something black and gloppy. "Hand balm," he says. You ask what is in it. He smiles. "Mostly beeswax, some ash, a little bear fat, if I am lucky." You do not press further, as your hands are wrapped in cloth to let the balm soak in. Your eyes wander to a shelf full of jars and vials. One contains dried flowers, another leeches. A third appears to hold what might be a pickled nose. You decide not to ask. Now comes the haircut. At last, you breathe a small sigh of relief. Hair in the Middle Ages carried all kinds of meaning. Long hair could signal youth, strength, or spiritual devotion. Short hair meant practicality or punishment, depending on who did the cutting. Monks had their iconic tonsures, where the crown of the head was shaved in devotion to God. Peasants often wore their hair simply for convenience. Nobles? Fashionably chaotic, of course. But for you, it is just time for a trim. Or so you think. Your barber pulls out a pair of shears that look like they once belonged to a sheep farmer. You begin snipping with gusto, humming an off-key chant. You close your eyes. Maybe he will not take off too much. The first few locks fall onto the floor, joining a pile of what might be straw, dirt, and someone else's beard. You try not to imagine the microbial cocktail you are now inhaling. The haircut goes quickly, in uneven chunks, and then suddenly he stops. "Lice," he says. You open one eye. He holds up a comb with a tiny, squirming dot on it. Do not worry. Common. You begin to worry. Lice were a fact of life in the Middle Ages, and barbers were often the frontline defense. They shaved heads, prescribed vinegar washes, and sometimes dusted scalps with powdered herbs or even crushed chrysanthemum petals, natural insecticides, they claimed. Others favored a paste of garlic and pig fat, which sounds effective mostly in the sense that no louse would want to stay near it. Your barber reaches for a ceramic bowl and pours in a glug of something that smells like wine and vinegar. He wets a cloth, then wraps it around your scalp like a fragrant helmet. "Let it sit," he says. "The spirits must marinate." Historians still argue whether barber treatments for lice were genuinely effective or just ritualized stalling. Some records show success with sulfur-based powders. Others suggest the lice just adapted and got smarter. In any case, clients often left the barbershop cleaner than they arrived and slightly drunk from the fumes. Your scalp begins to tingle. The barber nods in satisfaction. "See? That means it is working." Or your blood is on fire. Either way, we wait. While you marinate, he picks up a small knife and starts trimming stray hairs from your ears and neck. "Ears are important," he says, unprompted. They reveal health. Too much wax? Trouble in the liver? Not enough? Your bones are soft. You do not know whether he means metaphorically or literally. Quirky moment. In certain towns, barbers were also expected to perform ear piercing, usually for young men entering adulthood or for fashion-forward nobles. The same knife used for trimming could become an impromptu needle. If infection set in, the barber would offer onion poultices and holy water. At last, the vinegar wrap comes off. Your head feels oddly light and vaguely pickled. The barber gives your scalp a final inspection, mutters a blessing to Saint Apollonia, the patron saint of toothaches, oddly, and wipes his hands. You look at yourself in the warped bronze mirror he offers. The haircut is not bad, maybe a little lopsided, but in this era, symmetry is overrated. You reach for your coin pouch. He waves you off. Next time, you owe me a story first, because here, the price of healing is not just silver. It is company. It is presence. It is becoming part of the living, bleeding, grooming tapestry that keeps this strange world spinning. The barber steps back, wiping his blade on a cloth that probably started white a decade ago. You flex your fingers, your scalp still tingling faintly from the vinegar treatment, and wonder if the ordeal is finally over. But no, he is already eyeing your back with an appraising look that makes you deeply uncomfortable. You have a curve in your spine, he murmurs. Old injury? You shake your head. Then it is probably just a demon. You laugh nervously. He does not, because now comes the part where barbers turn from stylists and surgeons into, well, spiritual chiropractors. You brace yourself as he pulls a low wooden stool in front of you and gestures for you to sit, back straight, hands on your knees. A crackling fire in the hearth casts flickering shadows on the walls, and your reflection in the copper basin beside you looks very much like someone about to experience unsolicited spinal realignment. Medieval barbers were often called upon to treat aches, sprains, and all manner of joint troubles. Bone setters, they were sometimes called, especially if they could pop a dislocated shoulder back into place with a well-timed yank. There was no certification process, of course, just word of mouth, confident hands, and a gut feeling that if it hurts now, maybe it won't later. And so your barber places both hands on your shoulders, gently pushes, and listens for something. Creaks in the chest? Popping near the tailbone? No? Good. We begin. What follows is somewhere between a massage and medieval chiropractic theater. He presses into your spine with his thumbs, muttering things like tight liver energy and blocked wind channel. You are not sure whether he is talking about your body or the weather, but either way, his knuckles are finding pressure points you did not know existed. A sharp jab near your shoulder blade makes you yelp. Ah, he says, satisfied. There it is. Quirky detail. Barbers often learn their alignment techniques from traveling performers and street healers, many of whom swore by bone maps drawn centuries earlier by monks or scribes who may or may not have seen a skeleton in their lives. According to one such diagram, the spine contained not only bones, but also heat knots and sorrow humors. Fix those, they claimed, and your entire spirit could lighten. Historians still argue whether medieval bone setting techniques were genuinely helpful or just elaborate placebo. Some cases of healing were likely just the body doing what it does, getting better over time. But there are records of barbers popping joints back into place with enough skill to impress even modern orthopedists. Others, of course, left their patients worse than before, crawling out of the shop with more problems than they arrived with. You are not sure which category you will fall into. Your barber gives one final twist of your shoulder, and something audibly cracks. A warm flush spreads down your spine. It could be relief. It could be nerve damage. You do not ask. Instead, he stands back, pleased. Much better. Now your breath will flow evenly. You exhale. Carefully. It is only now, with your skeletal alignment theoretically improved, that you notice the line forming behind you. Word must have spread that the barber is in the zone tonight, and a few hopeful patients shuffle in holding various swollen limbs and desperate expressions. But before the next customer is called, the barber asks you to stay a bit longer. He needs an assistant. You look around, half expecting him to mean someone else. He does not. Just hold this, he says, handing you a long wooden stick with a curve at the end for steadying. The next client, a sheepish-looking man with a visibly crooked nose, sits down. Apparently, the problem started when a mule kicked him during a harvest festival. Now his snore can wake cattle. The barber nods at you. Hold the head. Steady, like cradling a melon made of pain. You do your best. The barber grips the man's nose, checks alignment, then with a swift motion, not unlike snapping a twig, corrects it. Probably. The man makes a sound somewhere between a squeal and a prayer. And just like that, you are now part of the staff. Quirky sidebar. Some barbers kept assistants not to learn the trade, but to distract the patient during particularly painful procedures. They would hum, tell stories, juggle apples, anything to keep the client from focusing too much on the fact that someone was, say, cracking their rib back into place. As you help the man sit upright, your barber pats your shoulder. You learn fast, he says. Maybe one day, you open your own stall. You are not sure whether to feel flattered or horrified. And just when you think your brief medical apprenticeship is over, the next patient is already limping in. A pale woman with what looks like a dislocated thumb and a bandage on her temple. Fell from a hayloft, she explains. The goat was being uncooperative. Your barber sighs with great theatrical weight. Goats. Always the goats. The treatment is quick. A dab of honey salve on the temple, a realignment of the thumb with a practice snap, and a tiny wooden splint tied with linen. He hands you the cloth roll without asking. You tie the bandage under his watchful eye, trying not to shake. Historians still debate how widely barbers' roles overlapped with those of traveling surgeons. While university-trained physicians often looked down on barbers, the common folk trusted them far more. After all, barbers were available, affordable, and most importantly, willing to touch the patient. Physicians often preferred to diagnose from afar, relying on urine charts and astrology more than physical examination. Barbers? They got in there, sometimes literally, with the final knot tied. The woman smiles faintly and presses a single coin into your hand instead of the barber's. You try to hand it off. The barber shakes his head. You earned it. The door opens again, and another patient peeks inside. You decide now might be the time to leave before this temporary apprenticeship becomes a full-time calling. As you stand, your back cracks again, somehow in the same place. The barber nods in approval. See? Already healing. You thank him. He waves you off, already rummaging through his cabinet of mysterious ointments for the next procedure. And as you step outside into the cool night air, you realize you smell like vinegar, mint, and maybe a little frog. Still, your head is lighter, your hands are smoother, your spine is debatably straighter, and you have survived the full medieval barber experience. So far, you step outside into the chill of the evening, the sky glowing orange with the last slivers of sun. But your break from the barber's world is short-lived. A hunched old man passes you, gripping his jaw, moaning like a ghost with a toothache. You know exactly where he is heading. You follow him in, tooth pulling. The very phrase sends a tingle of dread down your spine. And yet, in this barber's shop, it is just another Wednesday. The barber barely looks up as the old man shuffles in. "Ah," he says, gesturing to the stool by the window. "Bottom left again?" The man grunts. The barber glances at you. "You staying?" "You should. This one's a classic. There is no numbing injection, no sterile gloves, just a set of rusty, gleaming iron forceps that look like they belong in a dungeon." The barber pulls them from a leather pouch, tests their grip, and wipes them on his apron with a dramatic flourish that feels equal parts surgeon and street performer. In the Middle Ages, dental care was more damage control than prevention. There were no toothbrushes as you know them, maybe a frayed stick, some crushed salt, or mint leaves rubbed on the gums. And if a tooth started to hurt, you ignored it until you could not anymore. Then you went to the barber. Tooth pulling was a spectacle. In fact, barbers sometimes staged public extractions in town squares. A man would scream, a tooth would fly, the crowd would cheer or faint. Your barber leans the old man back, braces a knee on the stool for leverage, and slips the forceps deep into the poor soul's mouth. He tightens his grip, and with a twist and a sound that can only be described as crunch squish, the deed is done. The man lets out a hoarse gasp. Blood drips onto his collar, rotten to the root. The barber says proudly, holding up the offending molar like a trophy, "Smelled it before I saw it." You feel slightly ill. To control the bleeding, he stuffs a wad of wool soaked in vinegar and sage into the old man's mouth. Bite hard. Think happy thoughts. One mainstream fact: medieval barbers were the go-to dentists for most people well into the Renaissance. The professionalization of dentistry would not really take off until centuries later, and even then, barbers clung to the trade, often by advertising painless extractions and herbal remedies that may or may not have worked. Now here comes the quirky part. Your barber, proud of the extraction, strolls over to a shelf and adds the tooth to a small wooden bowl already full of other teeth. "For luck," he says. "Luck?" you ask. He nods. You keep the last tooth you pull each week. Keeps your own teeth strong. Toss them at bad omens, too. Chases ghosts off your doorstep. You blink. He offers the bowl for inspection. There are easily 50 teeth in it. Some blackened, some cracked, one possibly made of stone. You hand it back quickly. The old man, now slumped and blood-streaked, but somehow smiling, presses a few copper coins into the barber's hand and wobbles off. Another satisfied customer. Sort of. But the barber is not done. He pulls you toward a tall chair and starts poking at your teeth without warning. "Open," he says. You hesitate. "Open, or I will hum loudly until you do." You sigh and comply. He examines your mouth like a jeweler evaluating flawed gems. "Hum. A bit of tartar. Maybe a shadow here." He taps one molar with his nail, producing a sharp shock that makes you jolt. Could be nothing. Could be your downfall. He wipes his hands. "Do you want the cleaning or the teeth blessing package?" You stare blankly. "It comes with parsley," he adds helpfully. You choose the cleaning. Using what looks like a tiny chisel and a rag soaked in rosemary oil, he scrapes at your teeth while muttering under his breath. You suspect he is not actually saying anything, just adding a dramatic flair. There is a certain showmanship in his technique, probably learned from those open-air fairs, where barber surgeons competed for attention with fire breathers and snake oil salesmen. Historians still argue whether medieval barbers understood the relationship between gum disease and other health issues. Some believed bad breath meant a bad soul. Others thought mouth pain indicated imbalance in the liver. A few had a surprisingly accurate sense that infections in the gums could lead to worse outcomes, like heart trouble or death. But this knowledge was fragmented, inconsistent, and often drowned out by superstition. The scraping continues. A metallic tang spreads across your tongue. You regret not choosing the parsley. When he is done, he hands you a mirror. Your teeth are definitely cleaner, if slightly sore. He offers a final rinse. Wine, garlic, and mint steep for 3 days in a jar. He keeps by the hearth. You swish. You gag. You survive. Quirky fringe detail. Some barbers claim they could transplant teeth from one person to another, usually from poor people to wealthy clients. In rare and dubious procedures, they would remove a healthy tooth from one mouth and jam it into the gum socket of another, hoping it would take. Spoiler, it usually did not, but it made for a dramatic sales pitch. Your barber tells you this story as he tosses another extracted tooth into the bowl. "I tried it once," he says. "Tooth jumped right back out. Must have been cursed." He winks. Before you can ask more, another patient is being led in. This one, a young woman with swollen cheeks and eyes full of dread. The barber smiles gently. "Tooth or heartbreak?" She opens her mouth. "Definitely tooth." As the barber preps his tools, you quietly slip toward the back wall. You have had enough of mouths and molars for one evening. Your jaw aches in sympathy. But just as you think you are free, the barber calls to you. "Wait, you forgot your clove." You turn. He tosses you a small dried clove, the medieval version of breath mint and painkiller all in one. You nod and tuck it behind your cheek. It tastes like dust and cinnamon, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit like courage. You chew the clove slowly, letting its numbing heat seep across your tongue. The barber is already wrist deep in his next patient's molar misfortunes, so you edge past the drying herbs, the tooth bowl, and a suspicious jar labeled simply ointment, slipping into the quieter back of the shop. But of course, there is no real escape, because just behind the linen curtain, you find what the barber calls his surgical nook. It looks more like a prop closet from a horror play. A trestle table, stained and nicked. A bucket you do not want to look into. Several lengths of cloth, some clean, some, well, seasoned. And the tools. Oh, the tools. They hang from hooks or rest neatly in trays. Curved knives, blunt spoons, bone saws, scalpels as thin as feathers, tongues, hooks, clamps. There is even a red hot poker, nestled in embers like some ominous campfire story waiting to happen. And right in the middle, like a guest of honor, is a long, narrow instrument you recognize instantly. The dreaded trepanation, the act of drilling a hole in someone's skull to relieve pressure, release spirits, or, depending on who you asked, just balance the humors. And yes, barbers did that too. You're still gaping when the barber appears behind you, wiping his hands on his apron. Lovely, isn't it? He says, gesturing to the tools like they are fine silverware. Each one has a story. Want to see the leech pot? You pretend you did not hear. He walks over, plucks up the trepan, and holds it aloft. Use this on a man who swore demons were trying to escape through his ears. Cut a neat little window in the skull. Said he felt 10 years younger. You hope that story ended well. Mainstream historical fact. Trepanation was surprisingly common across many ancient and medieval cultures, used for everything from treating head injuries to curing epilepsy, depression, and vague ailments like melancholia. And while it sounds barbaric now, evidence from recovered skulls shows that many patients survived and lived for years after the procedure, bones partially healed, edges smoothed. Historians still argue whether barbers performed trepanations regularly or whether it was left mostly to itinerant surgeons. Some believe village barbers tackled anything short of outright death, especially in emergencies where no one else dared try. Others insist only the most daring or reckless barbers ventured into the cranium. Either way, the trepan sat in their toolkit, ready and waiting. Your barber runs a thumb along the blade edge. This one was gifted to me by a monk. Said it belonged to a bishop who swore it cured his migraines. Died of a chicken bone later. But still, you wonder if this counts as a sales pitch. He sets it down and moves on, showing you another favorite, the cautery iron. Used to sear wounds closed, stop bleeding, and if the mood was right, terrify small children into finishing their vegetables. It is long, slender, and ends in a spiral curl, like a branding iron with ambition. Quirky detail. Cautery was not just physical, it was symbolic. Burning a wound was thought to chase out the bad blood or seal in the good spirit. In fact, some barbers would make a cross with the hot iron over the wound to add a spiritual layer. Patients rarely argued, too busy screaming. The barber tells you about one such treatment, a shepherd who stumbled in with a gash across his thigh, left by a wild boar. Blood everywhere. The barber recalls wistfully, like describing a painting. Had to cauterize right there. No time to stitch. He fainted, came to, thanked me with cheese. He nodded politely, unsure whether to be impressed or concerned about food hygiene. And then he gestures to a smaller shelf of tiny, delicate tools. hooks, curved needles, a scoop with a hollow tip. These are fry stones, he says, tapping a jar filled with cloudy pebbles. Eye stones? Turns out, medieval folks sometimes developed calcium deposits or painful hard cysts in the corners of their eyes. The treatment was, as you might fear, physical removal. The barber would hold the patient's head still, slide a scoop beneath the stone, and flick it out. No anesthetic. Possibly a song. He picks up the scoop. Did 3 of these in 1 week. Popular time for eye stones. You edge back toward the curtain, heart thudding like a guilty drum. But the barber stops you with a hand on your shoulder. Let me show you the blood bowl. You really do not want to see the blood bowl, but you do. It is not just one bowl. It is a matching set, each with a red line painted on the inside to mark the ideal bloodletting volume. Some are shallow, meant for the elderly or children. Others are deep enough to make you wonder if their patients walked out or were carried. And yes, the infamous Barber's bowl, it traces its roots here. The red and white spiral is a symbol of the bandages used during bloodletting. After a procedure, barbers would hang their bloody cloths out to dry on a stick. The breeze would twist them into a striped display. Eventually, it became a signpost. Blood, bandages, and Barbary inside. The barber chuckles. You see a red pole. You know someone's probably screaming inside. He says this as a joke. You are no longer sure. There is a moment of silence. He senses your unease and gently pats your back. Do not worry, he says kindly. We only do the trepan if we really like you. Then he walks off whistling. You linger, glancing once more at the tools, the saws, the jars, the polite little blood bowls. Every inch of this room is soaked in purpose and history, and probably a bit of actual blood. And as you pass back into the main shop, the scent of cloves and smoke following you like a cloak, you cannot help but wonder, why did anyone ever come here twice? Then again, what other choice did they have? The shop door creaks again. And this time it is not another groaning patient. It is a delivery boy with dirt on his face, a basket under his arm, and a scroll of orders tied to one wrist. The barber snatches the list like it is a royal decree and waves you over. Ready for a field trip? He asks, already untying his apron. Apparently, barbers did not just wait for the wounded to come to them. They also traveled, sometimes summoned to noble courts, sometimes yanked from bed to tend to a mid-battle emergency, and sometimes, like now, simply restocking their supply of whatever vaguely medical items their work demanded. You walk with him through muddy streets, past open markets, and barking dogs, the moon just beginning to peek through the rooftops like a curious neighbor. The barber hums a lullaby that is absolutely not soothing. First stop, the herbalist, he says. You expect a tidy shop of pressed flowers and glass bottles. You get a room that smells like 10,000 armpits and 20,000 types of mold. The herbalist herself is a squat woman with eyes sharper than her shears. She greets the barber like an old war comrade and hands him a bundle of dried nettle, a vial of poppy syrup, and something that looks like a petrified lizard for fevers, infections, and terrible neighbors, she says cheerfully. Mainstream fact: medieval barbers relied heavily on herbal medicine. They were not just blade wielders, but also apothecaries in their own right. From crushed garlic to soothe wounds to lavender oil for calming anxiety, their toolkits often included as many plants as knives. Many barbers even kept small herb gardens outside their shops. The barber tucks the lizard into his pouch without question. Next on the list, pig fat. For salves, you do not ask further. You arrive at a butcher's stall where a man with hands like anvils tosses over a greasy cloth bundle. The barber sniffs it, nods once, and adds it to the ever-growing pile of strange acquisitions. People think this is the gross part, he says, but I find it relaxing. Smells like purpose. You gag slightly as the wind shifts. The real treasure, he tells you, comes from the apothecary. You imagine glass shelves, tidy rows of labeled jars, the delicate tinkle of bells as you enter. You get none of that. Instead, the apothecary is a cloaked man in a cellar whose candles seem allergic to staying lit. He speaks in riddles, and when the barber hands over coins, he mutters something about spleen spirits and hands back a jar of gray powder, ground unicorn horn. The apothecary says flatly. The barber raises an eyebrow. Last time it was dragon's knuckle. The man shrugs. Seasonal change. Historians still argue whether medieval medical vendors actually believed in the mythical ingredients they sold, or whether they were simply taking advantage of desperate clients. Some potions contained real therapeutic herbs, like willow bark for pain relief, but others were total inventions, concocted to sound expensive and magical. The barber pockets the jar. Sometimes you just need a little placebo. You trudge on, the city quieter now. A man calls out for healing from a tavern window, but the barber waves him off. Too much ale. He will live, probably. As you cross a narrow bridge, the barber stops and looks over the edge. Beneath you, black water curls like an oozing snake. Know what we used to throw in there? He asks, grinning. Teeth, old bandages, unwanted limbs. You look at him. Kidding, he says. He is absolutely not kidding. You reach the barber's favorite part of the run, the bone man. This man sells animal bones, some polished into tools, others ground into powder for poultices. He even offers which bones, which look suspiciously like chicken wings. The barber selects a femur with care, explaining that ground bone was sometimes used to bind wounds or, if one were particularly brave, mixed into ointments to strengthen the afflicted limb. You are learning more than you wanted to know. Quirky tidbit. Some barbers claimed they could read bones, especially the cracked fragments from failed amputations or surgeries. By interpreting patterns in the splits and stress lines, they would predict a patient's prognosis or even give life advice. It was like palm reading, but with femurs. By the time you return to the shop, your arms ache from carrying mystery parcels, and you smell like someone else's laundry. The barber dumps everything on his work table and begins sorting with the precision of a chef preparing for dinner service. He sets the dried nettle beside a jar of honeycomb and carefully mixes the pig fat with crushed thyme and something that might be dirt. Then he pours the unicorn powder into a bowl of vinegar and stirs until it fizzes ominously. "What is that for?" you ask. "Hair tonic," he replies. You blink. "Really?" "No," he grins. "Probably not. One last item. A packet of leeches." "Yes, leeches." Barbers used them for bloodletting when knives were too risky or too boring. Kept in cool jars and fed now and then with a drop of wine or sometimes a barber's own toe. Leeches were prized medical tools, slimy, squirmy, and surprisingly effective. The barber taps the jar like it is a snow globe. Inside, the leeches wriggle with lazy menace. "Want to name one?" he offers. You decline. As he organizes his chaos, you notice a ledger on the wall listing patients' names, treatments, and fees. Some have check marks. Some are crossed out. Some have notes like "still owes me cheese" or "do not let back in." You ask if he keeps regular hours. He shrugs. "We open when pain does." And with that, he blows out a candle and turns to you. "Tomorrow," he says, "we cut a bladder stone." You freeze. "That was a joke," he adds. But you are pretty sure it was not. You wake to the smell of something sharp, like vinegar soaked in regret, and realize you fell asleep against a sack of nettles. The barber is already at work, sleeves rolled, hands slick with ointment, a basin of cloudy water at his feet. He is humming again, always humming. Today's task? Stitching. A man slumps in the chair, groaning softly, a jagged tear in his shoulder that looks more like a burst sausage than a wound. The barber does not blink, just wipes it clean with wine and starts threading his needle. The needle, by the way, is thick, crooked, forged more for hide than human skin. And the thread? Horsehair. That is right, horsehair. Mainstream historical fact. Barbers often used whatever materials they had for stitching wounds, horsehair being a favorite due to its durability and availability. It was boiled first, then threaded through skin in big, looping stitches like the seams of a badly made coat. Silk was occasionally used for finer jobs, but for the average villager, horsehair was the special of the day. The barber works quickly, murmuring to himself. The patient hisses through his teeth, gripping the chair arms like they owe him money. "Almost done," the barber says, yanking the final stitch tight. He bites off the end of the thread and dabs the wound with something that smells like moss and boiled socks. "Antibacterial," he winks. You doubt the science. You watch closely as he applies a poultice made of lard, thyme, and a touch of honey, an ancient blend believed to draw out infection. Historians still argue whether barbers truly understood germ theory in any instinctive way, or if they simply noticed that certain plants helped wounds heal better. Either way, their methods were often surprisingly effective. The barber finishes with a strip of linen bandage and a dramatic flourish, as if he has just completed a painting. The patient groans something like thanks and stumbles out, leaving a few coins and a trail of nervous sweat behind. "All right," the barber says, cracking his knuckles. Next, and next it is, a woman with a swollen ankle the size of a goose's head. She limps in, supported by her daughter, and shoots the barber a look that could curdle milk. He bows slightly. Sprain or spirits? She scowls. Both. Apparently, that is not a joke. The treatment begins with a warm compress, then a massage with oil laced with crushed mustard seed, believed to stimulate blood flow and reduce swelling. The barber kneads gently, muttering prayers under his breath, half practical and half theatrical. Want to scare the swelling out of it? He jokes, pulling out a small bone rattle. The daughter giggles. The mother does not. Quirky detail. Some barbers offer light massage therapy or bone setting services for minor sprains, dislocations, and sore muscles. This was often done with aromatic oils, heated stones, or even the occasional incantation, especially in rural areas where superstition still danced hand in hand with medicine. He wraps the ankle with cloth soaked in vinegar and sage, then ties it with a knot that only he seems able to untie. She should stay off it for 3 days, he says. The woman stares at him. Fine, he amends. 2 days and a half. She leaves without paying. You ask about it. Barter system, he shrugs. She will bring eggs. Then comes a child with an infected finger, red, throbbing, already leaking. The barber sits him down, offers a stick to bite, and opens the wound with a slim blade so clean it gleams. He drains the pus, sprinkles the opening with powdered garlic and crushed charcoal, and wraps it tight. The boy is rewarded with a date from a dusty jar. You wonder if it is older than he is. As you sweep up discarded bandages, you spot a curious box under the bench. Inside, dozens of tiny tools, carefully wrapped in cloth. These are the barber's finer instruments, used for things like ingrown nails, cyst removal, and mole checking. He lifts one, a fine, sharp hook, and twirls it like a magician. This one, he says, pulled a worm from a man's leg. You raise your eyebrows. True story. He thought it was a curse. Turned out to be lunch for a bird later. You choose not to verify. The day rolls on, and with it come more bodies. A blacksmith with burned palms, a girl with a sliced ear, a monk who thinks he swallowed a beetle in his sleep and wants it chased out. That last one gets a spoonful of mint and a polite suggestion to drink slowly. Throughout it all, the barber moves like water, bending, adjusting, improvising. There are no charts, no sterilized trays, no nurse to fetch more gauze. Just instinct, repetition, and the deep-seated belief that something, anything, is better than nothing. Historians still argue whether this wide array of treatments made barbers more dangerous than helpful. Some accounts blame them for spreading infection, using dull blades, or applying the wrong herbs. Others praise their hands on knowledge and accessibility, especially in rural areas where physicians were a luxury most people would never meet. You take a moment to look around. The tools are drying by the fire. A bucket of bloody water has been dumped outside. The chair is empty for now. The barber sits beside you, offers a hunk of bread, and says, "You learn faster by watching and reading. You learn best by bleeding." You decide not to ask how he knows that. As evening settles in, a hush falls over the shop. The candles flicker lower. A breeze sneaks through the cracked window, stirring the herbs above your head. The barber closes his eyes, head tilted back. "Tomorrow," he mutters, "I might pull 3 teeth, or cut open a boil the size of a plum, or shave a bishop." You ask which he prefers. He opens one eye. "Honestly, I miss haircuts." You follow the barber outside, where the air smells of smoke and wet earth, a strange but comforting mix. Today is market day, and the town square is alive with the hum of bartering voices, the clatter of wooden carts, and the occasional braying of a goat who seems to have taken up residence somewhere nearby. The barber eyes the crowd like a hawk. His hands twitch, not from nerves, but from habit. The barber's work extends far beyond the 4 walls of his shop. He is about to demonstrate how he juggles his many roles in this bustling hub of commerce and chaos. The first stop, a stall where a woman complains bitterly about a toothache that makes her eye twitch like a startled crow. The barber kneels beside her, probing her jaw gently with fingers that have steadied 1,000 nerves and 1,000 more nerves he has frayed. "Open," he commands softly. She obliges, wincing as the light of the sun catches the swelling. You watch as he selects a small, rusted-looking tool from his pouch, something that looks more like a tiny claw than a medical instrument. It is a dental key, a device designed to grip and twist teeth out of their sockets. Mainstream historical fact: dental keys were a common instrument used by barbers to pull teeth before the invention of modern forceps. They were effective but brutal, often resulting in broken teeth or jaw injuries if handled carelessly. The barber wraps a cloth around the woman's head for support, whispers a quick prayer to whatever saint might be listening, and then, with a twist and a pop, extracts the offending tooth. The woman gasps, but smiles through the tears, already feeling relief. You can't help but notice the crowd gathering, half curious, half horrified, as the barber wipes his hands on his apron and hands the tooth to a boy who is eagerly collecting such trophies. But tooth pulling is only one of his talents today. Next, he moves to a nearby bench where a man lies stiffly, clutching his side. The barber examines him carefully and announces the diagnosis: a burst boil, swollen and angry. No physician would dare cut it out here. No apothecary could offer instant relief. This is barber territory. You watch as he prepares a heated blade, warmed over a fire pit and carefully tested on a sleeve. His fingers steady despite the flickering flame, and the man's quiet, uneven breaths. With a swift cut, he opens the boil, allowing the pus to drain freely. The smell is overpowering, a mix of burnt flesh and sour wine. He cleans the wound with wine and applies a poultice of crushed herbs and pig fat, the mixture thick and oddly fragrant. Quirky tidbit: medieval barbers were often called bleeders, not just for bloodletting, but for their ability to lance boils, abscesses, and other skin infections, which could be deadly if left untreated. Some even carried small sets of cautery tools, heated irons used to burn wounds closed. The man groans, but eventually relaxes as the pressure drains away. The barber pats his shoulder. "Stay clean, or it will come back like a bad joke." You wince sympathetically. Before you can catch your breath, the barber is hailed by a local lord's page, summoning him to a private tent near the edge of the market. You follow, curiosity piqued. Inside the tent, the lord sits on a low stool, his face pale and twisted with discomfort. He has a nasty gash on his cheek, likely from a recent hunting accident. The barber sets to work, disinfecting the wound with a mixture of vinegar and honey, then stitching it with his trusty horsehair thread. You note how the barber's demeanor changes here. More careful, more patient. The stakes are higher. One wrong move could mean not only a lost patron, but political trouble. Historians still argue whether barbers' treatment of nobility elevated their status or merely made them convenient servants to the elite. Some records suggest barbers gained significant influence, acting as confidants and even spies, while others show them as mere tradesmen scraping by. When the stitching is done, the lord nods approvingly and hands the barber a small pouch of coins, far more generous than the usual market fare. As you step back into the sunlight, the barber shrugs off the tension and returns to the crowd, now eyeing a line of customers waiting for haircuts. Haircuts, yes, because despite all this medical drama, barbers were also hairstylists, shavers, and fashion influencers of their day. The barber pulls out a set of sharp shears and begins trimming a young man's unruly locks, shaping them into the latest trend, whatever that was back then. Probably something with a lot less gel. You watch as the barber skillfully shaves a customer's beard, balancing precision with speed. A quick jab here, a careful trim there. The shop smells faintly of lavender and burned hair. The barber's hands move with the confidence of a maestro, wielding scissors and razor with equal ease. Quirky detail. Some barbers were known to double as gossip hubs, spreading news and rumors while trimming hair. They often learned about political intrigues and social scandals before anyone else, their chairs serving as informal confessional booths. As the sun dips low, you realize how this one man balances so many roles: surgeon, dentist, stylist, and social hub, all while making it look effortless. You ask him if he ever feels overwhelmed. He grins, a flash of white teeth gleaming. Overwhelmed? Maybe, but if I stopped juggling, the whole town would fall apart. You laugh, and he nods. Exactly. The market's noise fades behind you as the barber leads you down a narrow alley toward a small, shadowy building. Inside, it smells of herbs and old leather, a sanctuary of sorts, hidden from the noisy world. This is where the barber keeps his secret stash, the potions, powders, and tinctures that give him a mystical edge. You watch as he pulls a drawer open, revealing jars filled with curious contents: crushed beetles, powdered bones, dried nettles, and something that looks suspiciously like ground-up snakeskin. Mainstream historical fact: medieval barbers often mixed herbal remedies and potions themselves, blending ancient medical knowledge with local folk wisdom. They prepared salves for everything from headaches to plague sores, though the effectiveness was hit or miss. A barber uncaps a small vial filled with a thick, dark liquid and holds it up to the light. "This is my miracle elixir," he says with a smirk. "Mostly vinegar, but it keeps the rats away. You chuckle, but then he leans in, lowering his voice. Historians still argue whether some of these concoctions actually did any good or were mostly placebo and smoke. You pick up a jar labeled Dragon's Breath, which turns out to be dried chili peppers crushed into powder. The barber laughs when you ask what it's for. Warming poultices, to get the blood flowing, or to scare off the unbrave. He moves on to a small mortar and pestle, grinding up herbs into a green paste. This here is for wounds, and this one, he says, flicking some powdered roots into a bowl, for calming nerves. Quirky detail. Some barbers doubled as apothecaries, creating their own medicines from local plants and minerals, blending science and superstition. They might prescribe something soothing one day and a bizarre charm the next. He shows you a bundle of dried herbs tied with string, rosemary, thyme, and a sprig of something unidentifiable but aromatic. These go on wounds or hung over doorways to keep evil spirits out. You never know when a little superstition might save your skin. You ask if he ever mixes anything poisonous by mistake. He grins and taps his temple. A sharp mind keeps a barber alive. Mostly, as he talks, you realize that this apothecary corner is more than just a collection of curiosities. It's a testament to the barber's improvisation skills, combining limited resources and centuries of trial and error. Then, a sharp knock at the door breaks the moment. A pale-faced woman enters, clutching a small boy whose eyes are rolling back with fever. "Please," she begs. He won't stop shaking. The barber wastes no time. He mixes a thick concoction of willow bark and honey, explaining that willow bark contains natural painkillers, much like aspirin. He administers a spoonful to the boy, then wraps him in a blanket and instructs the mother on how to keep him cool and hydrated. Historians still argue whether barbers played a major role in managing fevers and infections, or if their treatments sometimes made things worse. But it is clear that they were often the first, and sometimes the only, responders in emergencies. As the woman leaves, you notice a small leather-bound book on the shelf, filled with cramped notes and sketches. The barber says it is his personal journal, a mixture of remedies, observations, and odd stories from his work. You leaf through it, fascinated by entries about bloodletting techniques, tooth extractions, and a curious recipe involving crushed emeralds. You ask if he really uses that. "Only for the very rich," he says with a wink. The afternoon light wanes as you sit back and consider the barber's world, a blend of healing, craft, mystery, and a dash of showmanship. You realize this man is not just a jack of all trades, but a master of many, constantly adapting, learning, and juggling roles to serve his community in ways few others could. The shop feels alive with history and possibility, and you cannot help but feel a strange respect for this medieval multitasker. The evening deepens as the barber closes the apothecary drawer and turns toward the last light, slipping through the dusty window. Before you can ask about his evening routine, he beckons you outside again, this time toward the town's small chapel. You trail behind him, wondering why a barber would spend time in a place of worship. The stone walls are cool and quiet, and the faint scent of incense lingers in the air. Here, the barber kneels, but not to pray. Instead, he pulls out a small, worn book of prayers and blessings, his manual for spiritual healing. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, barbers often performed minor religious rites, such as blessing wounds or conducting bloodletting rituals accompanied by prayers. They walked a fine line between medicine and faith, sometimes viewed with suspicion by church authorities, but often welcomed by laypeople desperate for relief. You watch as he reads quietly, then raises his hand in blessing over a ragged bandage. Sometimes, he says softly, healing is as much about hope as it is about herbs and knives. You nod, feeling the heavy weight of centuries of belief mingled with practical care. Quirky tidbit. Some barbers were rumored to possess mystical powers, using charms, amulets, or secret incantations to protect patients from evil spirits or bad luck. These beliefs varied wildly by region and often overlapped with local superstitions. He leans closer and whispers. Historians still argue whether these rituals genuinely eased pain or simply helped the mind accept suffering. You smile, imagining a world where a whispered prayer and a sharp blade go hand in hand. After the blessing, the barber straightens and motions to a faded fresco on the wall, depicting a saint holding a pair of scissors, a curious reminder of how intertwined barbering and faith once were. You see, he says, we were not just cutting hair or pulling teeth. We were custodians of body and soul. As the chapel bell tolls the hour, the barber turns to you with a quiet smile. Come, he says, there is one more thing to show you before the day ends. He leads you back through winding alleys to a small garden behind the shop. Moonlight dapples the leaves of medicinal plants, carefully tended in neat rows. Lavender, chamomile, and something that looks suspiciously like belladonna. He kneels beside the plants and runs his fingers over the leaves, his voice dropping to a whisper. These, he says, are my allies, healing and harming, depending on how you use them. You reach out to touch the soft petals of a chamomile flower, feeling the coolness against your skin. The barber chuckles. Remember that next time you trust a barber with your scalp or your teeth. You realize the truth in his words. Medieval barbers were both healers and risk takers, balancing science, superstition, skill, and sometimes sheer luck. As the night settles in, you sit quietly, absorbing the layers of history around you. The line between barber and surgeon, apothecary and priest, stylist and sage, all blurred into a single figure moving through time. And you think, maybe that is why the story of medieval barbers still fascinates us, because they remind us that healing has always been messy, complicated, and somehow deeply human. You wake the next morning to the faint clang of the town's bell, signaling the start of another busy day. The barber is already at work, sharpening his tools on a whetstone that sings under his practiced touch. The scrape and grind fill the small room, blending oddly with the soft light spilling through the window. You notice the variety of blades he uses, not just scissors and razors, but knives of different shapes, each with a specific purpose. Mainstream historical fact. The barber's kit often included a range of surgical instruments, scalpels, forceps, and even early versions of bone saws, reflecting their role as minor surgeons and dentists as well as hair cutters. The barber picks up a delicate-looking razor and inspects it closely before running it carefully along a strop. His hands are steady, the motions rehearsed. Precision, he murmurs, is everything. One slip, and you lose more than a hair. You realize how much trust people placed in barbers, often surrendering their throats and scalps to these sharp tools with little more than a prayer. Quirky tidbit. Some barbers were so skilled they could shave a customer's beard while blindfolded, or so the stories say. Whether truth or exaggeration, such tales only added to their mystique. You watch as the first customer of the day arrives, a burly blacksmith with a wild mane and a face marked by soot and sweat. The barber gestures for him to sit, draping a rough cloth over his shoulders. While trimming the hair, the barber chats casually about the local rumors. Another example of how barbers were the town's unofficial news broadcasters. You listen, noting how gossip and hair cutting went hand in hand. Then the blacksmith asks for a quick shave. The barber switches tools swiftly, the razor gleaming in the morning light. As he shaves, you observe the delicate balance of pressure and angle needed to avoid cuts. The blacksmith winces once, but then relaxes, clearly satisfied. Historians still argue whether barbers or surgeons were the true pioneers of early surgical techniques, but it is clear barbers practiced a surprising range of procedures, from bloodletting to setting broken bones. Just then, a young woman enters, cradling a swollen jaw. She nods nervously as the barber gestures for her to sit. He inspects her mouth and mutters about a possible abscess. Without hesitation, he retrieves a small, pointed instrument and begins to lance the swelling carefully. You can almost feel the tension in the room, but the woman breathes easier as the pressure drains. Quirky detail. Some barbers carried a small bell to ring before surgery, believed to ward off evil spirits lurking in the patient's body. You ask if he uses one. He laughs, only when the day feels especially cursed. As the morning rush continues, you realize the barber's day is a whirlwind of multitasking, haircuts, surgeries, tooth extractions, herbal remedies, and the occasional bit of bedside manner. You wonder how he manages to keep it all straight. He shrugs. Practice, patience, and maybe a bit of luck. You nod, feeling a growing admiration for this medieval multitasker who juggled such disparate roles with skill and grace. The afternoon heat presses in as you follow the barber to the town square again, where a small crowd has gathered around a makeshift stage. Today, it seems the barber will add one more act to his juggling routine, a demonstration of bloodletting. You watch as he sets up his tools, leeches in a small bowl of water, lancets sharpened to a fine point, and cups for cupping therapy. The crowd murmurs, equal parts curious and wary. Mainstream historical fact: bloodletting was a staple of medieval medicine, believed to balance the body's humors and cure a wide range of ailments. Barbers commonly perform this procedure, often using leeches or lancets. The barber selects a volunteer, a nervous-looking farmer complaining of headaches and fatigue. He explains, in soothing tones, that removing some blood will ease his symptoms. You feel the tension as he carefully applies a leech to the farmer's arm. The creature attaches with surprising speed, its tiny jaws working like clockwork. Quirky tidbit. Leeches were so valuable that some barbers kept them alive in special jars and rented them out by the dozen. People believed leech therapy was as much a social ritual as a medical treatment. You overhear someone whispering. Historians still argue whether bloodletting actually helped or harmed patients, but it remained popular for centuries. The farmer grimaces as the leech swells with blood, then eventually drops off. The barber quickly applies a cup and uses heat to create suction, pulling more blood to the surface. You notice the barber's hands are steady but gentle, aware that too much blood could be dangerous. As the procedure ends, the farmer thanks him, already feeling a strange lightness. The crowd disperses, some shaking their heads, others impressed. You ask the barber if he ever questions this practice. He shrugs. Every day. But what else could we do? Next, the barber moves on to a young girl with tangled hair and a curious smile. He untangles the knots with patience, weaving in scented oils made from rosemary and lavender. Hair, you realize, was not just about looks. It was about hygiene, social standing, and sometimes even protection. You remember hearing that barbers also performed tonsure, the shaving of monks' heads, a symbol of religious devotion. The line between faith and fashion blurred, often in their work. The barber jokes about the monk's haircut being a trend that never really caught on outside the cloisters. You laugh softly, the sound blending with the afternoon birdsong. As the sun dips lower, the barber packs up his tools, ready to close the day. He pauses to thank you for tagging along, saying that most people only see the haircut side of his work. But there's more, he says. A whole world behind the scissors. You nod, feeling a deeper appreciation for the many hats medieval barbers wore. Not just tradesmen, but healers, counselors, and occasional miracle workers. And as the market quiets down, you realize this glimpse into the past has changed the way you see that humble barber's chair forever. The days turn into weeks, and you find yourself returning to the barber's shop, drawn not just by curiosity, but by a strange comfort in his presence. You begin to notice the subtle rituals that frame his work, the way he cleans his instruments with a cloth soaked in wine, believed to disinfect wounds, the careful way he arranges his tools at the start of each day, almost like a surgeon preparing for battle. Mainstream historical fact: wine was indeed used as a disinfectant in medieval times due to its alcohol content, though the understanding of germs was centuries away. One afternoon, you watch as the barber performs a delicate tooth extraction. The patient, a grizzled sailor with a toothache so severe it nearly bends his face in half, sits rigid in the chair. The barber's fingers are steady as he reaches for his extraction tools, which look like tiny pliers with curved tips. Quirky tidbit: some barbers earned extra income by being itinerant tooth pullers, traveling from village to village with a small bag of tools, sometimes accompanied by a trumpet or drum to announce their arrival. You notice the sailor grimace, but the barber's deft hand is quick, and soon the offending tooth is out. He wraps a clump of cloth around the wound, mumbling a quick blessing for healing. Historians still argue whether the pain relief methods used by barbers were effective or merely helped patients endure the agony. You ask the barber if he ever felt more like a dentist or a surgeon. He shrugs. Sometimes the line was thin, especially when you are dealing with mouths full of decay or heads full of wounds. You follow him into a dim corner where a small chest holds a curious assortment of teeth, some gold-capped, others blackened by decay, and a few suspiciously shiny and perfect. He grins. Trophies of the trade. You raise an eyebrow. You keep them? Some do, he replies. But mostly we just toss them when the patient's back is turned. The conversation turns to hygiene or the lack thereof. The barber laughs when you mention modern sterilization, shaking his head. Back then, if you worried about germs, you never got anything done. Yet, despite the risks, barbers developed surprisingly effective methods to prevent infection, such as boiling their tools when possible, using vinegar rinses, and employing herbal antiseptics. You ask if he ever feared harming patients. He looks you in the eye and says, "Every time I picked up a blade or a tool, that fear is what keeps you sharp." You feel a chill, imagining the stakes of his daily work. Then, as the sun sinks low, the barber pulls out a small mirror and invites you to look. "See the scars," he says. "Each one tells a story, some from me, some from those I helped." You see faint lines crisscrossing his hands and forearms, signs of a lifetime spent juggling blades and lives. In that quiet moment, you realize the medieval barber was not just a tradesman or a healer, but a guardian of stories, pain, and hope, balancing risk and skill in a dance as old as time. The seasons shift, and the town's rhythm settles into a comforting cadence. You find yourself returning to the barber's shop not just for knowledge, but for the oddly soothing atmosphere, the scent of herbs, the quiet click of scissors, the faint murmur of voices exchanging stories and woes. One day, a traveling soldier arrives, his cloak heavy with dust and the scars of battle. The barber greets him with a nod, recognizing the look of someone carrying more than just physical wounds. Mainstream historical fact: barbers frequently served soldiers, providing battlefield surgeries, setting broken bones, and tending to wounds, often with limited resources and under intense pressure. The soldier sits, revealing a ragged cut along his scalp and a deep gash across his forearm. The barber works quickly, cleaning and dressing the wounds with herbal poultices. Quirky detail: barbers sometimes acted as informal counselors, listening to soldiers' stories and offering comfort alongside their medical care, a role historians often overlook. As the barber tends to the soldier, he explains that healing is never just about the body. Sometimes, he says quietly, the mind needs a healer too. You nod, sensing a depth to his work that transcends the sharp blades and bandages. The soldier shares a tale of a fierce skirmish, the chaos of clashing swords, and the hollow weight of loss. The barber listens, then offers a prayer from his worn book. Historians still argue whether barbers were officially recognized as medical practitioners or simply tolerated for their practical skills. but their importance in wartime is undeniable. You watch as the soldier's eyes soften, the tension easing from his shoulders. Later, the barber shows you a collection of curious implements, some fashioned from bone, others from metal, that he uses for setting fractures and extracting splinters. You marvel at the ingenuity required to create such tools without modern technology. Quirky tidbit. Some barbers crafted custom instruments tailored to individual patients, making each tool a unique blend of craftsmanship and necessity. The afternoon fades, and the soldier thanks the barber, ready to rejoin his comrades with renewed strength. You reflect on the complexity of the barber's role, part surgeon, part healer, part listener, part craftsman. As the sun sets, you realize that the barber's skill was as much about empathy and adaptability as it was about sharp blades and herbal mixtures. And in this humble shop, where so many roles collided, you see the heart of medieval medicine beating strong, messy, and profoundly human. As twilight deepens, the barber invites you to observe a rarer, more secretive part of his craft, bloodletting beyond the usual leeches and lancets. Tonight, he plans to demonstrate cupping therapy, a method that might seem odd to your modern eyes. You watch carefully as he warms small glass cups over a flame, then quickly places them on a volunteer's back, creating a tight suction that draws blood to the surface. Mainstream historical fact: cupping therapy was a common medieval practice thought to stimulate circulation and draw out bad humors. It was performed by barbers alongside bloodletting and other treatments. The skin reddens beneath each cup, forming circular marks that will linger for days. The volunteer winces, but nods in approval, convinced of the therapy's benefits. Quirky tidbit. Some believed cupping could even improve mental clarity or cure headaches, though these claims varied widely by region and practitioner. You notice the barber's precise timing, removing each cup at just the right moment to maximize effect without causing excessive pain. Historians still argue whether cupping's benefits were psychological or physiological, but its persistence across centuries speaks to its deep cultural roots. After the therapy, the barber carefully cleans the patient's back, applying a soothing herbal balm made from comfrey and arnica. You ask about other unusual treatments he has encountered. He chuckles, recalling a tale of a fellow barber who used powdered crocodile dung as a sunblock, a bizarre but true anecdote you had not heard before. You laugh softly, amazed by the strange creativity of medieval medicine. The evening winds down, and the barber carefully puts away his glass cups and herbal mixtures. You see, he says, medicine is as much art as science. Sometimes you must be bold, other times gentle. You reflect on the delicate balance the barber maintained between these extremes. As you prepare to leave, he hands you a small vial of lavender oil. For restless nights, he says with a wink. You tuck it into your pocket, feeling a strange gratitude for this glimpse into a world where healing was an unpredictable mix of skill, superstition, and hope. And as you step into the cool night air, you realize the medieval barber was much more than a mere hair cutter. They were pioneers navigating the uncertain waters of early medicine, one patient at a time. The days grow shorter and colder, but the barber's shop remains a warm refuge, filled with the comforting scent of herbs and the soft murmur of conversation. Today, a visiting scholar arrives, intrigued by the barber's unusual mix of skills and stories. You watch as the two discuss the evolving nature of medicine, the scholar eager to understand how barbers fit into the broader medical world. Mainstream historical fact: by the late medieval period, barbers began to distinguish themselves more clearly from university-trained physicians and surgeons, yet their practical experience kept them indispensable. The scholar pulls out a stack of parchments and asks about the barber's records. Did he keep any notes or case histories? The barber shakes his head with a smile. No, my memory is my ledger. Quirky tidbit. Some barbers used coded marks or simple drawings on scraps of parchment to remind themselves of patient treatments, an early form of record-keeping lost to time. You overhear the scholar remark, historians still argue whether barbers should be credited as medical professionals or seen as skilled tradesmen working on the margins. The barber laughs, then leans in to whisper, "We are whoever the patient believes we are." The conversation shifts to education and training. The barber explains how most of his skills were learned through apprenticeship, watching, practicing, and sometimes learning the hard way. You realize how different this was from the formal medical schools popping up in cities, where theory often outweighed hands-on experience. The scholar is fascinated by the barber's practical wisdom, noting that in many ways, barbers kept medicine alive in rural areas where doctors rarely ventured. You ask about the barber's future hopes. Perhaps one day, he says thoughtfully, the scalpel and the scissors will belong to different hands. But until then, I keep both. As the scholar packs up to leave, you feel the weight of this transitional time, the cusp between tradition and modernity, where roles blurred and boundaries shifted. And in this quiet moment, you understand that medieval barbers were more than a footnote in history. They were key players shaping the future of healing. Winter's chill settles over the town, and the barber's shop feels cozier than ever. Today, a group of townsfolk gathers around for a rare occasion, a barber's lecture on hygiene and health, meant to educate the public. You listen as the barber, clearing his throat, speaks plainly about the importance of cleanliness, fresh air, and diet, concepts that seem surprisingly modern. Mainstream historical fact: despite limited scientific knowledge, many medieval barbers advocated basic hygiene and recommended herbal remedies to prevent disease. He warns about stagnant water and poor sanitation, explaining how these invite sickness, a warning all too relevant in cramped medieval towns. Quirky tidbit: some barbers carried small brushes to clean their instruments mid-procedure, but others relied on quick rinses with wine or vinegar, hoping that was enough. The crowd asks questions, ranging from tooth care to preventing plague. The barber answers candidly, sometimes admitting that many mysteries remain unsolved. Historians still argue how effective these early health advice efforts were, but it is clear barbers played a vital role in community wellness. You note the barber's patient demeanor, his willingness to admit limits and share what he knows. After the lecture, a mother brings her sick child forward, seeking a remedy for a persistent cough. The The barber mixes a concoction of honey, thyme, and lemon, explaining the soothing properties of each. You watch as the child drinks the warm mixture, the tension in the room easing. It strikes you that the barber's work extends far beyond hair and teeth. It touches the very heart of community care. As the evening fades, you help the barber close the shop. Outside, snowflakes begin to fall softly. You feel a gentle calm settle over you, warmed by the knowledge that this humble figure carried immense responsibility in a world often harsh and uncertain. The medieval barber, you realize, was a guardian of health in a time when survival often depended on the sharpness of a blade and the kindness of a stranger. The snow blankets the town, muffling footsteps and softening sounds. You find yourself back in the barber's shop one last time, sitting by the fire as he reflects on the many roles he has played throughout the seasons. He speaks quietly about the balance he must maintain: the healer, the entertainer, the surgeon, the confidant, how the line between pain and relief, fear and trust, is so thin it could be severed by a single slip of the blade. Mainstream historical fact. By the end of the medieval period, the barber's role began to formalize, eventually leading to the split between barber surgeons and the more specialized surgeons who trained in universities. He smiles wistfully, acknowledging that while the tools may change, the core of the work remains the same: caring for people when they are at their most vulnerable. Quirky tidbit. Some barbers kept lucky charms, small stones, carved bones, or religious relics to protect them from harm or bring success to their procedures. You ask if he ever feared his work would be forgotten, lost to time and progress. Perhaps, he says, but every scar, every story leaves a mark, and those marks live on in the hands of those who heal after me. Historians still argue about the true status of barbers in the medical hierarchy, but one thing is clear: they bridged worlds, carrying ancient traditions into new ages. As the fire crackles softly, the barber hands you a small comb, simple, worn, but shaped by countless skilled fingers. You realize it is a symbol, a passing of the torch, and a reminder of the many faces of healing. Outside, the night sky sparkles with stars, vast and patient. And as you prepare to leave, the barber's voice lingers in your mind, a quiet invitation to see beyond the surface, to the stories hidden beneath every haircut, every pulled tooth, every carefully tended wound. This has been your journey into a world where scissors and scalpels dance together, where the barber was a master of many arts. And as you step into the cold night, you carry with you a newfound respect for the humble, complex craft of the medieval barber. You settle deeper into your chair, the soft hum of the night wrapping around you like a gentle blanket. The stories you have heard, the sharp edges of blades, the scent of herbs, the quiet courage in the barber's hands, slowly fade into a calm rhythm. The world of medieval barbers, once so vivid and intense, now rests softly in the back of your mind, like the last flicker of a candle's flame before it sighs out. There is a certain peace in knowing that healing, in all its messy, uncertain glory, has always been a deeply human act. The barber's trade was never just about cutting hair or pulling teeth. It was about holding a space for trust, for fear, for hope. Those centuries-old tools, those ancient rituals, they carry whispers of resilience and kindness, reminders that even in the darkest times, people reached out to care for one another. As your eyes grow heavy, imagine the warmth of that little shop, the flicker of firelight on worn wood, the quiet murmur of voices sharing stories across time. Let the gentle weight of history soothe your thoughts and slow your breath. You do not need to understand every detail or unravel every mystery. Just let yourself drift, carried by the soft current of human connection. Soon, you will close your eyes, and the past and present will mingle in your dreams. Rest easy, knowing that the hands that once wielded scissors and scalpels did so with care, even when the world felt uncertain. Sleep now, wrapped in the quiet embrace of time and story.